Hi everyone, I'm Heath Miller and I will be answering some questions for you. What would you name your boat if you had one? Well, I do not have a boat. However, ironically, I am talking to you right now from a former boat shed where I record audiobooks and do other voice acting from. I've never actually seen a boat in here. When we moved in, it was already chock full of the debris from living that the previous occupants had left for us, and then we added to that by putting anything we didn't have a place for in here, which eventually we had to clear out to fit in the fantastic vocal booth that I work from now. So I think I would probably name my boat the SS Audio Boat. I know puns are very popular when it comes to boat names, so we'll go with that. What's the most useless talent you have? Well, the first one that springs to mind is that I can catch a ball with the back of my hand. When I was younger, I used to juggle and do some other circus skills, and when I was traveling around the world in my early 20s, I took a small rubber bouncy ball as company, and so I practiced throwing it up with a flick of the knuckles and then catching it on the back of the hand. And so I'm quite good at that. It doesn't really have any practical application. I used to do contact juggling, which is, if you've seen the movie Labyrinth with David Bowie, the artist Michael Motion does contact juggling, so it's where you have a crystal or a ball and you manipulate it with your hands. So catching on the back of the hand or being able to hold a ball comfortably on the back of the hand is part of that skill set. But it is pretty useless in the scheme of things. What is the dumbest way you've been injured? Well, when I was a teenager in high school, I went on an adventure camp, I forget the destination, and it was actual camping, so there were no dorms or anything. We were in tents. I didn't have a tent, so I borrowed one, and I had never been camping up until that point in my life. And so when it came time to set up the tent, I unpacked it and I put it down, and after a day of walking kilometers and kilometers, I was exhausted, and so I went to sleep. There was no bedroll or mat or anything. It was just the plastic of the tent and a sleeping bag, and I pitched it apparently on a rock. And so I slept the night on the rock. And I woke up the next morning and discovered that in my sleep the blood had congealed in the vertebra in my neck, and so consequently I could not move my neck from the right angle it had set itself in while I slept. So I was looking directly over my right shoulder. We were in the middle of nowhere, so I had to walk in this fashion, like some kind of Frankenstein's monster, to the nearest settlement where I got to see a doctor. What's the most beautiful place you've ever been? I was doing stage combat in London, and my partner in broadsword combat was a wonderful American woman, and she invited me to come from London to Hawaii, to Maui, where we would do yoga and eat whole foods, and it was a retreat that she had set up herself. It wasn't an organized thing. It turns out she was quite wealthy. She had inherited a lot of money from her parents, so I said yes, and I went to Seattle and went to Hawaii, all paid for by this wonderful benefactor. And while I was there, I went on a hike through a bamboo forest in Maui. It was a town, it was near Paia, I believe it was called. And I went on a hike up and up and up. There was a few rock pools and a waterfall, but I kept going until I got to the top. And there was one small pool up on the top of this forest in Hawaii with guava fruit plopping into the water and the buzzing of a few insects. It was completely isolated, absolutely gorgeous, and I lay in the cool water. Unfortunately, on the way back down the valley wall, vines and rocks and the like, I fell and slipped and slid down quite a way into, fortunately, another pool of water, and on the way I sliced open my leg quite significantly. But I was concerned about paying the medical bill or the hospital bill. So instead of doing that, it was washed off in the waterfall, and then I bandaged it up myself. So I still, of course, have a scar on my leg from that. Gorgeous place, though. What would be the theme song of your life? I once went on a camp, again, camping, and we were told to bring a song that said something about ourselves. It was a small group from school. So I did, and we were together playing these songs. Now, it turns out a good 50% of the students brought the same song. I forget the name of it, but it's the one by the Cranberries that goes, "My father, my mother." So having heard that song about 3 times the whole way through, respectfully, when people said that was their song, we would just take it as a given and move on to the next one. And there was a few other songs as well. And then it got to me, and I had brought the song "Here Comes Another One," which is by Monty Python. It's a very silly song, but I adore it. So Google "Here Comes Another One" and have a listen. It's from the Contractual Obligation album, which I still think is a spectacular name for an album. Who would you pick to narrate your autobiography? Right, my autobiography. So in this hypothetical, I guess I'm dead, because the obvious choice seems like me, in that I narrate audiobooks for a living and it's my autobiography. But let's say that I have passed and I have left wishes for my autobiography to be read posthumously by someone who has presumably agreed to this. Well, a reviewer once very kindly said that I sounded like a young Stephen Fry in a particular book. So I'm going to say Stephen Fry. What more are you wanting from your career right now? I adore reading audiobooks, and I really enjoy variety, so I've been reading non-fiction and fiction, science fiction, fantasy, romance, biography. I have some horror coming up, and I hope to continue to do lots of different kinds of books. That said, I would love to voice a character in a computer game. I've loved computer games since I was a tiny child, and I would adore to have that opportunity and to know perhaps that I was the voice of a character in a game that was someone's favourite game, the game they return to again and again, that they thoroughly enjoyed, like I have done with so many games. So yeah, that's my achievable something more. What TV show, movie, or game just never gets old? I mentioned the contact juggling with the crystal, so I think Labyrinth. I have seen it countless times on VHS when I was a child, and now on streaming. I've seen it in a beautiful cinema, in my favourite cinema in the world, in Melbourne, Australia. It's a cinema called the Astor in St Kilda, where I lived for about 10 years. I didn't live in the cinema specifically, I wish, but quite close by. I would jump on the number 78 tram. We have trams in Melbourne, and go rattling down the street and go see movies. They had a lot of classic films there, and I saw The Labyrinth there for the 50th, 60th, who knows, time. And on the big screen, again, it just held up. It's absolutely my favourite movie, so it does not get old for me. David Bowie, puppetry, music, fantasy, really just a fantastic film. What mundane thing do you find absolutely fascinating? So many things. I adore history. In general, have always done. So, for example, when I was touring around Australia as a theatre actor, we would play very small towns and small theatres sometimes, and invariably there would be a museum of wool, or the historic birthplace of someone, a poet that no one really remembers anymore but was still set up as a museum. And I would always go. Some of my fellow cast members preferred to spend their time not accompanying me to the gallery of toothpick history and design, but I would go and read all the plaques and talk to the nice old lady who was the volunteer who took your money. So yeah, I love museums, I love history, and I still do now. If I'm traveling around for going to conventions or for other reasons, and I discover there is a small museum of typewriters nearby, sign me up. take my money. I will be there to learn about the history of typewriters in that particular region of the United States of America. When was the last time you laughed so hard you cried? And why? I think it would be my father's funeral. Please don't stop listening right there, because that will sound very strange. Disclaimer, I love my father very much. He's a wonderful father, wonderful man. He's very much missed by me and many others. He unfortunately passed last year. I was here in America, and because of COVID, I was unable to get back to Australia and be there for the funeral. So, like so many things, for so many of us over the past year and more, I watched his funeral on the internet. There was a camera set up in the small chapel where there was a service, and my mother was there, and so were some other members of my family. I had recorded a message that was played in lieu of my presence there. My brother, who is a musician, fantastic songwriter and singer, he recorded a song, and it was a beautiful song and a lovely recording and very touching, and it was playing during the funeral as I was watching. And right at the quietest moment of the song, there was a noise, and it got louder and louder, and I could see on the camera various people looking around at what was clearly a phone ringing, increasingly loudly. And then my dear friend Jessica, hello Jessica, if you're listening to this, I saw her realize it was her phone in her handbag, ringing at top volume, and she took it out of her handbag and turned it off and looked rather embarrassed. And I was already crying, as one does at one's father's funeral if one liked one's father. So I began laughing hysterically and then went back to crying. Mostly because I knew my father would have enjoyed that so much. He would have found it just really funny. And thinking of him laughing and reacting to the phone going off in the middle of the sad, beautiful song during his funeral really just got me right in the funny bone. Laughter is fantastic always, but laughter when you're not supposed to be laughing is icing on the humour cake. Well, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. Those are some answers to some great questions. So I hope you were entertained, or you learned something, or you have a new desire to go visit the Museum of Wool in Geelong, Victoria, Australia, and I will see all of you out there in the world of audiobooks.